Our presenter today is Christie Angel. She's Chief Executive at YWCA Columbus. Established 134 years ago, YWCA is one of the oldest organizations in our community. Its mission is to empower women and eliminate racism. Before taking this position, Christie handled public affairs for CalFee Strategic Solutions. This is a consulting group that handles communication, public affairs, and government relations. And previously, she led the External Affairs Office for Mayor Mike Coleman. She was responsible for developing and retaining relationships with business and community partners. She also worked in community relations for a telecommunications company and spent the earlier years of her career working for Columbus City Council in its nonprofit center on housing and homeless issues. Currently, Christie serves on the board of Campus Partners, Greater Columbus Arts Council, and the Human Service Chamber of Franklin County. She is chair of the Public Policy Committee for the Ohio Council of YWCAs. It's hard to find anyone in our community who's been a more active leader in the civic and business activities of Columbus. Christie and her husband, Otto Beatty III, are my friends and neighbors in downtown Columbus. Please join me in offering a Rotary welcome to Christie Angel.
Thank you, Ken. Good to see you. Unfortunately, we're Zooming and we haven't been able to see one another in person, or we didn't have the opportunity to enjoy Red, White, and Boom at your place this year. But hopefully next year we can do that. And thank you all to all of the members of Rotary Club for inviting me here today. And I want to say a special hello to Renee Shoemate, who is YWCA Columbus's past board chair. Renee has been on the board for many, many years, I think maybe 12 years. And she has served in leadership for a good part of that time. And in particular, Renee was board chair when I was hired to serve in the executive officer position. And Renee was also board chair, leading us through much of and was campaign chair, she and her husband, leading us through the renovation of our downtown building. So I also want to say hello to my past board chair. I'm going to share my screen as I prepare to share a little bit of a presentation that I have titled Building Our Racial Literacy and an Ally Community. So let me share my screen. Give me just a moment and I will start the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So I want to start first by just talking about what to expect from today's presentation. And I want this to be, you know, a way while I work through the presentation, but if you really have a question, you want to stop me, please feel free to do that. And then we will move on to Q&A certainly at the end of this. But I want to, you know, kind of walk through some of the terms and definitions. To some, this may seem, these terms and definitions may seem, you've seen it before, but, you know, I'd like to start here. We like to start here as YWCA, kind of building from here, you know, and so kind of think of this as a kind of a one-on-one course, if you will. So today we'll talk about some terms and definitions. We'll talk about how to build a strong ally community, and then we'll do some Q&A. So terms and conditions. What I have here is really talking about the types of racial inequity. So structural is the interplay of policies, practices, and programs of differing institutions, which leads to adverse outcomes and conditions for communities of color as compared to majority communities. And that occurs within the context of racialized historical and cultural conditions. Institutional would be those policies and practices and procedures that work to benefit the majority of the community and to the detriment of people of color, usually unintentionally and inadvertently. And then individual will be those things that we might see more frequently or experience more frequently, that we can immediately call out. So prejudgment, bias, stereotypes, generalizations about an individual or group of people based on race. Impacts of racism and individuals, majority community, people of color, this is individual racism can result in illegal discrimination, but the impacts of racism in individuals together can result in kind of internalized privilege and oppression. So these are just some terms, sometimes these terms get used inadvertently, they get used in the wrong place. And so I always like to just share these terms. I've been through some racial equity training in particular, and race is a social construct, one that was created to really create ranking between three distinct biological groups, putting the Caucasoid or European community on top, if you will, and the Negroid or the African community kind of on the bottom, basically, saying that we were unequal and creating kind of this system of race. Racism, as you can see, is when one uses it's the use of institutional structural power, and that's what creates racism. And so when you hear about reverse racism, it's really it's not likely that there is such a thing as reverse racism, because racism really is based on who has the power, and typically people of color do not possess the power. So then these terms are used quite often, right? We hear bias, unconscious bias, implicit bias. We heard a lot about that, especially in the last decade or so. And so what is bias? Well, it's an orientation towards something, that for someone, it can be negative, it can be positive. We all have biases. It's not uncommon for any of us to have them. We shouldn't be ashamed of them. What is important is that we recognize them and know them. And when we see them come into play, we can know how to adjust. And then prejudice. Prejudice is a word. It's something we've heard about for many, many years. It's an assumption or a knowledge about something or someone rooted in personal experiences. And it is informed usually by a stereotype, and a stereotype is a trait or characteristic assumed to be true of all members of a particular group. It's not fair for YWCA Columbus to stereotype men. That use that as an example, where we might say, all men, don't care about child rearing. That would be a stereotype. That is not true, and it would be an unfair characteristic or trait to be assumed of men. And then our next terms and definitions we hear quite a bit: diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. And I'll just quickly say that diversity, these are some of the most important terms these days, because we hear a lot about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. We hear about teams forming inside of workplaces. And I think it's important to always understand these definitions. We at YWCA strive to really focus on these because they mean different things. Diversity, focusing on, well, how many people of color, women, men, etc., how many of these, whatever these are, how many apples do we have in the basket versus oranges, how many do we have in the room? So diversity programs, cultural celebrations, education programs, and all of that, they are not equivalent to doing racial justice. It's just adding to who's in the room, or, in some instances, seeking to transform, because we want to have different voices at the table. But just because you're in the room doesn't mean you have a voice at the table. The next step is equality. Equality has an emphasis on everything being equal, but often ignores the historic and the structural factors that created the inequity in the first place. And so it's very important while we may be giving everyone the same tools and resources, that history and the structural factors often still create an imbalance. Oftentimes you hear people, you might hear someone say, I want to claim to be colorblind or have a colorblind orientation. And colorblind policies, they want to have colorblind policies that treat everyone equal. And color blindness often leads to inequity because it does not acknowledge the history and the contemporary, the forces, the systematic forces of oppression that don't allow us all to be ourselves, our full selves, equally. And so then we go to equity. And equity has an emphasis on and seeks to render justice. This is the work that we do at YWCA Columbus, where we look at our social justice work. We seek to render justice by deeply concerning structural factors that benefit some social groups and communities and harms others. And then inclusion ultimately is that, going back to that diversity, it's having a diverse room, but then being inclusive of that individual or those individuals, their engagement, their access, their opportunity, and including them in the conversation. And so now I'm going to share my favorite slide. This has been my favorite slide for the last 3 months, 2 months maybe, since we've been going through some of the social justice uprising in particular. And I think it is the best way to describe all of these terms, these inequality. So you see in the first slide, inequality, there's unequal access to the opportunities. The tree is leaning, the apples are falling, and really neither one of the individuals can get to the apples, but the person on the left, the individual on the left, can probably get a few apples to drop, whereas there aren't that many apples to drop for the individual on the right. And then we go to equality. And so now they both have the same ladder. So they have equal and evenly distributed tools and assistance, and yet the person on the right still can't reach the apples. The person on the left can reach them easily. And then we go to equity. And so now equity, we have given the person on the right a taller ladder. And so that person is reaching the apples. But as you can see, the tree has far more apples on the left side than it does on the right. So those are custom tools that identify and address inequality. And the last slide, which is the slide that so many of us are seeking today, is the justice slide. We've straightened the tree. We both have equal access. We have the same ladders, or the two individuals have the same ladders. The tree is straightened up. Therefore, the sun is hitting the tree and the apples are growing equitably on both sides of the tree. And so we fixed the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. This is one of my favorite slides. You've probably seen slides through the years. There are people looking over a fence and those kinds of things. But this one for me is the one that we use quite often here at YWCA when we are describing these terms. Uh-oh, gotta go back. So how to be an ally. So I suspect, many people are interested in becoming allies to, you're hearing about the Black Lives Matter movement and the work that's being done. We're hearing about racism as a public health crisis. We want to know, how do I be an ally to this work? And so I say first and foremost, listening. Seek to understand before being understood. Re-educate yourself with the hard history of the birth and development of our nation and the current racial inequity issues. One of our favorite podcasts, but you can also read it in print, is the 1619 New York Times series by the Pulitzer Prize winning author Nicole Hannah-Jones. We will be sending out a link of resources to Ken Ackerman following this presentation, and the link to this podcast and to this series will be included in it. It's, I think the podcast is 6 series, and of course there were several articles written on the 400th anniversary of slavery last year. And again, it's a Pulitzer Prize winning series, and it really retraces kind of that hard history that we have. And then next would say, get involved. figure out where you're comfortable getting involved. And sometimes it may be joining an organization that is doing some work. Rick Studer and I talked about some of his Linden work in our breakout session, but there are lots of conversations and there's lots of work being done. And sometimes it's just hosting conversations with your friends and family and colleagues about race and racism, why racial equity is important to you, seeking to learn and understand more, inviting someone who maybe doesn't look like you or worship where you worship or live in your neighborhood, but inviting them and their families to the conversation. It's a little harder to do that in COVID, so Zoom is probably more appropriate, but to be able to have these conversations and ask some of the questions that maybe you are seeking so that you can be more engaged and involved. And then when you see racial inequities, you may witness or be aware of, speak up if you can, be it publicly or privately. I use one of the examples that I've experienced many, many times, and it goes something like this. I've been at a counter at a Nordstrom or Macy's and, kind of waiting for my place, waiting in line to be, to pay or what have you. And a salesperson oftentimes will look beyond me and ask the person behind me if they can be helped. And I am invisible to that person. And, it is not, I don't know that it is intentional, and it is what it is. And I've had people say, she was here first and I am served. And that happens more times than you think. And it's those little things when someone speaks up, on your behalf, just because they know that someone has looked past you. And so that's just a small example, but there are many others. And then I would say, lastly, use your privilege as a platform to make room for those of us who may not have the opportunity to be heard or seen. So I want to be an ally, but I don't know what to do. So we talked about some of those things that you can do, but I would say here are a few tips that we give people here at YWCA Columbus. One, don't be afraid to be wrong. Do not say anything, or ask a question, and you may be wrong, but if you're in a comfortable room and talking with those that you are comfortable, they can help educate or inform you. We as people of color also have to be careful that we do not judge people for not knowing the right terms or recognizing all of the struggles and the things that we've been through. And I think it's important for you to be comfortable in places with people that you can talk with and not be afraid to be wrong, because you're seeking understanding. Black people are not required to educate you. Now, this, may sound odd, but when I gave this presentation the first time, Ken, I think, heard some of that. And one of the things that was striking were the number of people who were calling upon people of color, in particular Black people, after the death of George Floyd, and asking lots of questions and asking us to kind of unpack what was happening. And it was difficult to go through that and try to do that during that time, because it was such a painful time, sometimes recalling the trauma that we had all been through ourselves. And so many of us have had to tell our friends, I can send you resources, but right now I can't educate you on this because I am experiencing something myself that is very painful and that is a version of trauma. And so while we want to be in the room and we want to help you, we also cannot just be required to solely do it. We have to be able to give you resources to do what you need to do and do the work as an ally. Get uncomfortable. It is talking about race and equity and racial justice and social justice can be uncomfortable, but we have to get uncomfortable so that we get comfortable with where we're going and where we need to be as a community. And getting uncomfortable means that you're doing the work. It's part of the journey. And then your contribution. Think about what you want your contribution to be. Not everyone is going to protest. I personally only attended one protest with our organization, largely because we're in a pandemic, and being out with hundreds and thousands of people is not comfortable, whether you have a mask or not. And some of us, just we're not comfortable doing that. But you can decide where you want your contribution to be, and it can be in other ways. You can decide to donate. You can decide to have conversations just like you're having today. You can have small group conversations. You can read. You can educate yourself, and you can share it with others who are seeking to build allies, to become allies. And then destroying the myth. Destroying the myth is just all about destroying the myths about race. And destroying the myths about, some of the left, what I call the left behinds of slavery. And there are many. And in the readings, you will find some of those things, but destroying some of those myths are very important. And sometimes it's people from the majority of the community who really can help us destroy the myths, because when you speak, people will listen. And then how you spend your money is political. So I don't mean capital P in these days and times, but how you spend your money, where you intend to use your money, can also help to build allies by strengthening minority-owned businesses and the like. And so then I think about allies in the business, corporate, and nonprofit sector. So I often say we can't program our way out of this. And I say that because many people, when George Floyd passed away, were asking YWCA Columbus, what new programs are we going to stand up and what new things are we going to do? And quite frankly, we decided, we don't necessarily need new things. We now need to make investments in the things that we've been doing so that we can reach more people. But beyond that, this is not about a particular program. It may be an investment in the things that we know we should invest in, but it isn't going to. We can't program our way out of all of this. And so leadership rooms will have to change. We have to have board diversity. That's for-profit and nonprofit. C-suite and decision-making positions have to have diversity and inclusion and equity as a part of those decisions. We have to have a shared power base. We have to increase and measure our diversity spend. So especially in those corporate sectors, in the business sector, increasing and measuring our diversity spend. It's not enough to say that you're doing business with diverse businesses, but you have to measure it, because we all know that which does not get measured does not get done. And we have to set goals for ourselves. And then commitment to implicit bias, racial equity training and development. It's an ongoing journey. And so continued training is very, very important. There are some great training organizations out here in the Columbus area. I'll tell you about some work that YWCA is also going to do when we get right to the end. And then again, as I said, measuring goals for all of your DEI efforts is very important. Now, I'm approaching the Q&A portion of the program, and so I think it's important for us to be able to have a conversation. And so I will stop talking and give room for questions and answers and discussion.
Christie?
Yes, Rick.
You almost ended with programs that you already have, initiatives you already have at the Y. I don't want to take for granted that I and everyone else know those top three. What are they, and how are you, how should I say, bulking them up given everything that's going on today?
Thank you, Rick. So YWCA Columbus, many of you probably know us for our housing programs, and we have education programs for school-age children, and then 0 to pre-K. But we have a social justice department. that is largely responsible for education, advocacy, engagement, and then leadership training. And so with renewed interest and investment of late in our programs, we are starting a training component, a DEI training component of our work. We will have several training modules. We'll have trainers that are much better than me here, but they will begin their work in the third and fourth quarter of this year. We are also bulking up our policy and advocacy work. So we have an advocacy agenda that was just recently updated, but we are actually hiring a policy person who will be in charge of much of that work. In the coming weeks, we will announce a particular DEI racial equity training for the community. It will be done, presented by an organization called the Racial Equity Institute, and it will be in conjunction with an October event that we have. And there's more to come. Next week, we should be making that announcement. I'll make sure that that link gets sent out. It will be free to the community, and so, or somewhat free. It'll be at very little charge. This is a group that charges $4,000 or $5,000 plus travel just to come in and do this work. And we believe it's so important that we provide it at a very minimal cost to the community. So that will be available along with our own training curriculum. And then our community conversations, Rick, you remember some of those. We are going to be standing up virtual community conversations along with a 21-day racial equity challenge in the first part of next year. So a robust program offering coming from YWCA starting in the third quarter of this year.
Thank you, Christie. Hey, Christie, we have a chat question from Steve Miller. He asked, can you share with the Columbus Rotary how they can best leverage their collective membership to embrace equity and social justice?
Wow. Well, I think the first part of it, thank you, Steve, for the question. I think, and Steve may actually have some thoughts as well, and I'd be interested in hearing them. I mean, I think the first step is doing what you're doing today, which is seeking to understand and seeking to think about how to be an ally. But I also, or an ally organization, I should say. I also think, inviting more people of color and having more presentations like this would also be helpful on specific topics that are kind of plaguing our community, so that this group may decide, I don't know if you do community projects, but you may decide to, invest, get involved in a particular community project and get engaged in that project. Learning more about some of the work that we're doing around racism as a public health crisis is a great example of that. Many of your businesses may have signed on to support that effort, but now the real work is going to begin, where we have to begin to implement steps to remove the health disparities. And the health disparities, really are plaguing our community, and they're costly to our community. So I think getting involved in that work is a great place for business and for Rotary clubs such as this to help get more involved. And then again, I think continuing to seek to learn about the community and ways to get involved. I also think specific efforts to diversify your club, your Rotary club, and inviting more to participate, people that, look like you come from people of color, more women, et cetera, really looking to diversify the club as well, I think would also be a value and benefit. And then seeing that your leadership is reflective of a diverse group of people.
Great, thanks,
Steve,
Christie. So I think we had
Steve, go ahead. I was going to
That's
say,
okay.
I don't know if Steve wanted to add anything more. I know that he is an experienced leader in this work as well.
Steve?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Christie for the outstanding work she's doing in our community. now overall in the work she's doing at the YWCA. She's been a champion and leader for a long time, and we applaud your work and really appreciate you being here today to share your comments and vision. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to work for equity as it relates to education, health disparities, and economic empowerment of minority businesses, because high tide raises all ships and it's good for our community. So again, we thank you, and I look forward to working more closely with Scott and the Columbus Rotary to bring diversity and opportunities and ideas to that organization. God bless you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks. I think Tom Carlisi had a question.
Yeah, thank you. I really am enjoying the topic. Thank you for being here. And I want a comment and then a question. I want to let you know that our club created a Peace Builders Committee. And one of the things we do is we have programs we're reaching out. By Rotary being a nonpartisan humanitarian organization, sometimes we can be the club is the hub, we kind of say. We brought 80 people together a year ago, February. We were at New Salem, or St. Stephen's, and it was about building peace across differences. And one of the things we've done is we not only done projects, but we've invited many people in the community, oftentimes of color or women, et cetera, to come and join our committee. They don't have to be Rotarians. So that's something that's really exciting. And then they say, oh, we didn't even know Rotary was doing all that. So what I'd like to do is let you know also, I'm working with the Ohio Council of Churches and the Interfaith Association, and they have social justice and preventing racism, and mainly in a big place. So in September, we've got the International Day of Peace coming up. I'd like to suggest our club do another forum where we bring all the organizational leaders together and create another opportunity to share. Maybe we sign people up for your social justice committee training, okay, or training. So I'd like to just invite a connection beyond this meeting. So what happens next is what I'm sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I love the social justice work. I mean, is that Reverend Aaron's? Is that Tim Aaron?
No, that's Tim is fabulous. No, there's the Reverend Jack Sullivan Jr. is the executive director now, and he is one of the lead. He actually got an award from the governor last fall for his work in social justice world, and we're leading on that. Yeah, but Tim Aaron's also is doing extraordinary work.
Yes. But we would really be interested in participating in that September day of peace, and then that would be a great way to share our training as well. So I will make sure that I put all of my contact information in the chat so that we can stay in touch on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Follow up to everybody. I'm helping also. We're putting on an online event August the 11th. It's called Youth in 2020. So we're bringing 14-year-olds through 22-year-olds to come together and just say what a year it's been and what's important to you. And we're going to end up with them all coming up with personal action plans on how they can help foster a more just and inclusive community. So that's coming up also.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
So we have time for one more question. If somebody's got a burning question they'd like to ask Christie today, otherwise
How about
she's
if I jump in?
Go
Thanks.
ahead.
Hey,
Hi, Don.
Christie, Don
Hi,
DePearl,
Don.
great, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Simple question, maybe not a simple answer, but as a white man, how important is it for us to listen right now? Just to listen.
It's Don, thank you for the question. It's very important because listening can lead to understanding. And oftentimes, with white men in particular, the thought is, I know best and I have the answers. I've seen this, I've done this before, I've done it all kind of a situation, or done a lot. And so I think it's important that they listen so that we can achieve some real change and understanding if they just, if you all just listen to us, and listen to those that maybe you work with, or your neighbors and what they've gone through. In addition to, I think, the other tools of education, Don, I do not underestimate the power of the readings. And, now on Netflix or any of the whatever the entertainment providers, you can find all kinds of documentaries and historical and even all the way up to date materials that can also help with the understanding and can really be part of the listening. I mean, that's part of the listening too, because I think that, that then gives you the aha moment it's now I get it, right? Now I understand. And you, before you get to understanding, can't do all the talking, the listening is so important. So thank you for sharing that. I even say, for me and my peer group, it's important for us to listen to the younger generation, because the younger generation has experienced things in such a different way than I experienced them. And certainly then, my parents would say the same, to me, that they experienced things, differently than I did. And so, we are also needing to listen to the younger generation, because they're really going to be the ones that are going to have to carry this through. And they're going to ultimately, I think, be the biggest beneficiaries of the change that we're all pushing for right now. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, Christie, for being here today. Everybody really enjoyed it. Rotary, Columbus Rotary in particular, we're going to continue to work on our diversity, equality, equity, inclusion with the goal of justice. So I appreciate the message today, and we may be reaching back out to you for additional guidance.
Absolutely. I welcome the opportunity, and we will send the materials out to Ken so that everyone will have them. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Next week, our program will feature Yarmir Steiner discussing the future of retail and retail experience in the age of COVID. We are adjourned.